This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 110 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm May.
Welcome back all. Today I want to hear about some kind of Linux and open source type tech from your past that has inspired where you are today. Spoiler, mine is the EPC that I've talked about loads before. So who's going first? May, what inspired you?
So I worked a job pretty early on where, have any of you heard of Fog?
Yes, I have. Yeah, free open ghost.
Hopefully it's not from me.
No, it wasn't from you. I remember playing about with this in my misspent youth at some point.
For those of us that are just thinking of the opening of Bleak House, can you enlighten us? What is Fog?
So Norton Ghost is software that's meant to copy an image from one computer to a whole bunch of computers.
Mm-hmm.
Fog, free and open source Ghost, though they stopped calling it that after trademark concerns, I think, is that but open source.
So Clonezilla then?
Yeah, Clonezilla, like the server version. But it also grew to include a whole bunch of management things. So it could manage printers and software on a host. It would set host names for you and everything. It was pretty advanced for completely open source software. Of course, the way that you're supposed to do this with Windows hosts is you're supposed to use Windows Deployment Services, or WDS. But you see, at this job, I couldn't get a Windows Server license assigned to me, so I couldn't actually make that happen. Also, the hardware that I had to run it on was I think, Core 2 Duo era Xeon, and that was not acceptable even at the time where I was putting this together. But with basically nothing except for a Debian install and trying really hard, I managed to install the software called Fog, and then I was able to take an image of a Windows 8 computer, and I deployed it to a whole bunch of different computers, and it didn't work right, because in order to deploy a Windows image to a bunch of different computers, well, you need to sysprep it, which resets the activation ID of each computer so that they can all activate themselves correctly. And then, well, it's kind of, I don't want to install all the software on the image. That makes the image huge, and then it takes forever to install the image, and the computer's usable right away, but it's not usable for the entire time that it's being re-imaged. Well, did you know that you can install and update software using this thing? You can make self-extracting executables that will put your installer on the disk and then run it, or if you want to even run a .reg file, you can do that in using the Fog client. Tired of getting up and rebooting every single PC into the network boot setup so that you can image them? No problem. Set all those computers to boot to the network immediately and turn on Wake on LAN, and then you're going to get all of your computers rebooting when you have a task to send them, re-image, boot up, do all of their setup, get everything done. No one even knew anything happened.
You're listening to Windows After Dark.
Look, it was based on a Linux host. It was all running on PHP FPM, and I don't even remember what it was using as a DHCP server and some TFTP server. It was all coming from Linux.
May, what you're describing just sounds mad, doesn't it? You know, rolling some kind of image-based operating system that you're able to deploy kind of continuously and bake updates. And who would ever adopt that? What a stupid idea. I bet no one's doing that now.
I bet no one's doing that right now. I'm not using a computer running that exact kind of software.
But this opened your eyes to how great Linux was then.
Not only that, I fixed bugs with the author of the software. I wasn't actually supposed to be doing this, but just TeamViewered into my laptop and checking what was going on in the environment. Because it was like, for the author of the software, it was the best production deployment that they had access to. They had their own deployment at their school, but then there's this one over here that's owned by, I don't know, some kid in Wisconsin or something. where everything's completely different and there's a different set of needs. So when bugs crop up, we can figure out what's going on better and release fixes to software and fix bugs for tons of people. That was the real, not just the free consulting, but that was the real like, oh, that's what open source means. That's what we can really do with open source software communities rather than just open source software. Also, there was the one time where someone was sitting in the computer lab just like doing some homework or something, I think, and every single computer in the room started up in unison, and I think they ran out screaming.
Well, mine is much more desktop focused. I've mentioned the EPC, it was an E901, and at the time I was kind of in the process of moving to Linux on my main computer. I was still dual booting with Windows, because there was certain stuff that I needed. And it was just so freeing to have this little laptop that I could take anywhere with me. It could boot off an SD card, so I didn't even have to mess around carrying USB sticks with me. And it just allowed me to try just dozens of distros and desktop environments and just experience this wonderful world of desktop Linux.
My colleague, when he first started, was carrying one to work every day in his coat pocket, just about. And he stopped doing that now, and I kind of miss it. He'd come in and be working on something, and he'd have put it into suspend, and then he'd carry on. Even though he had his work machine ready to use, he'd carry on just finishing off. And I still think the form factor is fantastic, and also actually terrible, but the nostalgia of the form factor is brilliant. When you use one now, the touchpad is terribly tiny, and it's got bezels as wide as a bus, but they were great at the time.
Well, I recently had returned to me a machine of a similar size, I guess, which was an 11-inch MacBook Air. And having taken that thing on a trip the last couple of days, that form factor was just so good. And arguably the 11-inch MacBook Air was the peak of that, because this one had a 4th gen i7 and an SSD and was actually usable even today. And yeah, I just miss when computers were that small. It doesn't seem that long ago, but equally, it just doesn't exist anymore.
I don't know. An XPS 13 from 5 years ago is still a decent computer that's about that size and way more powerful than a 4th gen i7.
Yeah, but the beauty of those computers for me is that they were even new, throwaway cheap. Like you could get an EPC for less than 200 quid, brand new. Like, it just doesn't exist anymore. Like, your XPS is what, 600-700 quid new?
Oh, more than that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not a brand new computer with decent battery life that I can just throw into a bag.
You can't even get that with any of the micro PC vendors because they're either way too expensive or you're never going to get warranty support and they are going to break.
Yeah, or the firmware will be rubbish on them, or they're poorly optimized so the battery only lasts like 2 hours. That was just not a concern with netbooks. So I think your nostalgia is probably well placed, Joe, because nothing that good has existed since.
Yeah, and I was able to just take it to work with me, because at the time I worked somewhere where there was a lot of just kind of sitting around waiting for stuff to happen. There was always stuff I should have been doing, but, you know, when I was feeling lazy. And I would just connect to the Wi-Fi over the road and just play with Linux. And it was amazing. Like, just being able to do whatever I wanted with it. Like, right, I'm going to install this thing. Maybe it's going to make the Wi-Fi a little bit faster. Maybe it's going to completely break it and I'm going to have to reinstall. It doesn't matter because it's not my main machine. I'm not relying on this. And I think that is key, really. Well, it certainly was for me, having this toy, essentially, having this extra machine that didn't mean that I couldn't use my computer. It meant I couldn't use my Play computer if I messed it up, but I could always just reinstall it. And I feel like that is how to get into Linux. I don't know. Maybe it's not the way. Maybe the right way is to just put it on your main machine and be forced to fix things.
I feel like the way to get into Linux is the way that you got into Linux.
Yeah.
And everyone agrees the way that they did it is best.
Yeah, true.
Well, you're making me think of mine, which I was thinking about this the other day because I always consider when I started using Linux to be later than this, but actually I moved in to a house share with one of my oldest friends from school after we'd finished university. And he set up a headless box, and it must have been Ubuntu 12.04 that was on it, and Webmin. And I've just looked up Webmin because I was like, I wonder if that's still a thing. Yeah, it's still a thing. There's Webmin, VirtualMin, UserMin. It's all still going strong. But it was a great way, like it was a real novelty then, to be able to install an operating system on a computer and take away all the peripherals and still be able to get into it. And Webmin was a great way to basically ClickOps it at first, get things going. But it became like an experimentation box that we had in the room that we dried our washing in, right in the corner, hooked up to wired Ethernet that my housemate had like shonked under the carpet, basically. And he was good at terminating Ethernet cable. But we installed like a Plex server on it, a media server. And because we started playing with that, then we started to install it on our desktop machines. And I think I've spoken about this before. The laptop I had at the time, the Linux kernel and Intel HDA had a problem with the chip, which made the speakers pop on boot and shutdown every single time. And I was like, is it going to damage it? It's something to do with the way that was initializing the power and then killing it when you turned it off. And we managed to fix it by basically reordering the init of the operating system. And that was when I was like, you know, I look back now and like, that was when I was lost. That was the end of it then. You get sucked in. And the spirit of troubleshooting, you know, just this week of work, it's still the most satisfying thing is completing a problem puzzle that you get presented with in that way. You know, how do I stop the popping sound from my speakers? This week it was, how do I stop a background fuse mount from dropping? And what you said, May, like, I raised an issue at the GitHub repository. The maintainer was like, right, you've raised a good issue. It's very extensive, but I'm able to replicate this. And here is the code that fixes it. It's going in the next point release. And you're like, wow, that's, you know, you're not just waiting for Patch Tuesday and hoping that the changelog has something vaguely along the lines of what might fix it. This is tangibly now a fix that I know is going to happen.
I think that is really important, being able to go both ways of, I've helped other people solve their issues and other people have helped me solve my issue. And if we keep doing this, the knowledge base of the internet is going to get so big that we're going to replace all the software and then it's all not going to matter anymore. Wait, I think I got lost in there.
Well, it's funny that using that EPC as my kind of main Linux machine, it was never powerful. Even when it was new, it was not powerful. It was just about good enough. And that's why it ended up on XFCE, I think, because even GNOME 2 back then was just that little bit too heavy. And XFCE squeezed that little bit more performance out, at least in my mind. And it's why I ended up stuck on that for the last, 15 plus years.
And that was me running the full KDE3 desktop like a schmuck.
Yeah.
So I think for me, the thing that drew me most to Linux was Windows Vista readiness. And that might sound weird.
Or the lack thereof.
Well, yeah. So back in that era, Windows Vista Ready meant that your PC had 512 megabytes of RAM.
Steady, Gary.
I know. So I got bought one of these laptops that came with the free Windows Vista upgrade when Vista released. And I never did install it because the laptop ran like garbage under XP at the time. So this was some kind of AMD Sempron, which was AMD's competitor to the Celeron at the time. 512 meg of RAM and an 80 gig SATA drive of some description. And it was just never very good. Like, it never ran well. And I would take it into school, I would complain about it. And an IT teacher came in one day with 2 Tesco branded CDRs, one with Ubuntu 7.10 and one with Kubuntu 7.10. And I had already had an EPC like Joe and had been messing around with the Xandros install on there and hacking it about to get to the full desktop experience and not the EPC tailored experience. And he gave me these 2 CDRs and said, just install this. And being slightly naive at the time, I thought, nah, I'm not going to do that. But I did go home and I did keep moaning about this machine and eventually tried to boot the Ubuntu CD on it because he said that was the one that I should try first. And could I get it to boot? No, I could not. And it turns out that was a mixture of problems with X and the fact that my machine had a GeForce 6200 GPU, which was all the rage at the time. But what did end up booting on it was the Kubuntu 7.10 CD. So I tried that from the live session for a bit and then eventually just installed it. And the rest was history, I suppose.
Oh, man, with a laptop of that era or even before it, you're reminding me of bridging a Palm Pre through a Linux machine and out to a WRT-54G to get home internet that was faster than the dial-up we had at that point.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this machine also had Broadcom Wi-Fi, so I was playing with NDIS wrapper, then having to try and set up like wired bridging on the machine downstairs, because this was back in the era where we had a 512K broadband connection and the modem connected over USB to the computer. So then I had to set up like a USB to Ethernet bridge on Windows so that I could get a crossover cable and plug it into my laptop to then install NDIS wrapper. Yeah, those are things that I never wish to have to relive.
You've reminded me that I think before the EPC, I had a Fujitsu Siemens laptop that must have been a Celeron, I think, with 512 megabytes of RAM and an 80 gig spinning disk. And I only ever ran Windows on that. And I loved that thing. I was able to like make my music on it and, you know, go traveling and watch movies and stuff in the airport. But then one day it just stopped working. It just wouldn't turn on one morning. I was like, what? And just plugged it in and it was just totally dead. And I think it was around that time that I got the EPC and just started using my desktop machine full time. And then it must have been, I don't know, 5 or 6 years after that, I was at work and we used to fix things in this job. I'm not going to tell you exactly what it was, but we used to fix things. And my boss was very, very handy. And a neighbor came in with a laptop that was experiencing very similar symptoms. And so what he did was got some contact cleaner, sprayed it in the power socket thing, plugged the charger back in, and their laptop came to life. And I said to him, let me borrow that. So I took it home, squirt, plugged it in, turned straight on. So for like 5-6 years, for a couple of squirts of like £5 can worth of contact cleaner, I could have had this laptop. And instead, by that point, it was just terribly old, terribly shit, and just basically worthless. And I had properly mourned that laptop. And then it just came back to life one day.
So do any of you have like a piece of an old laptop or computer that you just keep around? Is that just me?
Well, I did have the element from my oven screwed to my wall as a modern art piece at one point after I replaced that. But I do have another laptop, which I have a lot of nostalgia for. And this was an Asus 15-inch, just basic, like Curry's PC World type machine. 2nd Gen i5. I think it came with 4 gigs of RAM. I eventually upgraded it to 16. I put an SSD in there. I replaced the optical drive with one of those caddies and put in a hard drive at one point and then upgraded to a bigger SSD. And I did all my first podcasts on that. I made all of them, recorded, edited, everything. And so I have a lot of nostalgia for it. Eventually, I lent it to my mum and then she said, oh, it won't charge. I thought, oh, yeah, spray the thing in. No, she had somehow damaged the connection. And so now you have to hold the plug in just right for it to work. And so that was it, basically ruined. And to this day, I like my keyboard to sit slightly higher than my mouse. And so my keyboard sits on top of that very laptop while I edit every single one of these shows.
Aww.
So it's still playing just a small part in everything I do.
So I have the same thing. I have the CPU out of this old Acer laptop that I had that just stopped working one day. And that thing, I'd replaced the keyboard in it. I'd upgraded the RAM in it. I think it was a little bit too early for upgrades to SSDs, but maybe I did that later in its life. It was a thing that I learned to 3D print on. It was a thing that I learned to like do things with Linux on. It was such an important laptop and just one day died. And it was not power. I took the whole dang thing apart. I'm remembering I glued the hinges in because the hinges had snapped apart at one point, even. That thing was rough.
And so you keep that CPU just for nostalgia then?
Pretty much. It's an AMD Phenom 2x4 something or other.
You never know when that might come in handy.
I keep searching for the day.
Yeah, it's much like my IDE hard drives that I have sitting around in my drawer next to me here.
Well, those are less nostalgia and more, how do I erase these?
Yeah.
E-waste, I think, is the word you're looking for.
Yes.
You mentioned, May, the WRT54G, and I'd forgotten about that, but we had that in that same house share, and of course that is basically what OpenWRT is named after. It's to open up your WRT 54G. It's the OG piece of hardware basically for that.
Well, no, it's called that because it's a fork of DDWRT.
Well, yeah, that's true. If we go back properly, but yeah, the whole point is that you're blowing open those WRT routers, which were incredible at the time, and it was a magic blue and black box that did everything. And in fact, yeah, you're right. We did run DDWRT on it at first.
Yeah, I ran DDWRT on mine.
Yeah. Again, it was kind of GUI led, but then once we were running OpenWRT, it became LEDy, however you want to say it, for a while. Then you start to realize that there's a command line interface underneath, there's a package manager, there's a command line syntax for configuration. So all these roads pull you in, and mainly it was because, how do we watch films on the telly downstairs? How do we keep those films around? How do we wake on LAN? How do we get remote access? How do we bridge two routers together? All this stuff. And all this stuff was the glue that makes it possible.
Right, well, on that nostalgic note, we should probably get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I've been May.
See you later.